Hello, I'm Mark Tucker,
And I'm Alan Furstenberg. We are Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs. Welcome, Alan.
Welcome, Mark. How you doing?
I'm doing well.
I'm glad to hear that.
How about you? What are you doing anything fun lately?
Fun lately. That's one way to put it, I guess. I had a I took the holiday break a couple weeks back at this point, and spent a lot of time of it trying to catch up on stuff in LangChain and just trying to bunch of bug fixes, tackle stuff that seems odd,
Hmm.
and just make sure things are working for Gemini 2.0. And one of the things that we ran into with Gemini 2.0 is, and we've talked about this a couple of weeks ago, how it's supposed to provide more agentic tool support, whatever that means.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure out what that meant. One of the things I learned is that it supports a lot more of Google's tools, more built in. They're better integrated. So Google had a tool they called search grounding, or grounding with Google search. And it worked pretty well. You were able to give it some parameters that controlled a little bit how it was doing that grounding and so forth. And they've changed it completely. So now instead of this semi-external tool, it's now more built into Gemini 2.0.
Oh, okay.
And as part of that, they changed the formatting and the syntax and a bunch of other stuff so that it was no longer compatible between Gemini 1.5 and Gemini 2.0.
Just the kind of stuff you love to have something working, especially with an integration like LangChain, and then decide that, oh, I need to redo some things. So
Right.
so so fun. Yeah, I can see why you kind of chuckled when I said what you've been doing fun. I'm sure you enjoyed getting things done and the accomplishment and the things that needed to happen, but fun sometimes not so much.
Well, I mean, in a way, it was fun because I got more into the Google search tool, which I hadn't really done before. I'd played with it a little bit, but I really got into it a little more. Understood a little bit better how it worked and the differences between 1.5 and 2.0.
Okay.
Built a layer so that in LangChain, you can use either syntax to set up the tool on either one, and it'll work in both. So if you start developing something in 1.5 and when you move it to 2.0, it'll just work. If you started playing with 2.0 and you also wanted to see how it worked with 1.5, it'll just work.
Wow.
And then I took it a step further because search grounding gives you some additional info. And I wanted to play with that. So I kind of want to show you
Yeah, I'd be excited
what this
about that.
is and how it ends up working. Because I'm actually really kind of pleased with it in a couple of ways. So let me bring up some source here. So what we're looking at now here is the critical lines to a little, very short little program that I whipped up. So we have two functions. The first is a function that gives us a model and it takes a parameter search, whether we want to use search grounding in it or not.
Okay.
And I've set this up against the Gemini 2 Flash model, the brand new experimental model, but this should work with Gemini 1.5. It creates a model, and this is exactly how we would create a model previously. There's nothing new or different here. We're just giving it the model name. We're doing something a little different here, so that if we've specified search, we're going to create a search tool. All that involves is a single parameter that takes no additional information. And we're going to bind this tool to the model. And if we're not doing a search, we're just going to return the model as is. But either way, we're returning this model object, one of which has tools bound to it or it doesn't have tools to it.
Okay.
This is a pretty common paradigm in LangChain. So we're going to call that when we invoke it. And this time we're going to be invoking it, giving it a prompt, and whether we're doing search or not. So we're going to get our model, and then we're going to create a formatter. And again, this is a pretty standard paradigm as part of LangChainJS. If we're doing search, we're going to send it through what's called a simple Google search output parser. which is a long name, I know.
Yeah.
But this is going to be the thing that will take the search results and not just the answer that came back, but also some additional information to help that Gemini used to help ground that answer.
Okay.
So what it will, and you'll see what I mean in a minute. So what it will do is it's going to send back information about where did it get particular chunks of information that it's replying with, and where can we go to learn more. And it takes that additional information and annotates the result to let us know where all of that information comes from. If you've used Perplexity, for example, Perplexity does this thing very routinely. Is you'll ask it a question and it gives you an answer that is annotated for where that answer came from.
Okay, good.
But if we're not doing a search, we're just going to use a simple output parser to turn it into a string.
All right.
We're then going to use LangChainJS has the notion, this is the chain in LangChainJS of setting it up so that the output of the model gets sent into the formatter. We're going to pipe it into the formatter. And then we're going to invoke this chain with our prompt, which will call the model with the prompt. The output from the model goes into the formatter. That result gets sent back to us as a string. We're going to return that string.
Okay.
The rest of it is pretty dull. It basically it will invoke it with the same prompt twice, once without the grounding, the other time with the grounding. And we'll take a look at what those two differences look like.
Okay.
So we're going to run the program, and since it's going to give us the output twice, we're going to put it through a pager so that it'll only show us one page at a time. So we'll run this, and the question that I'm asking it is, who won the Nobel Prize for physics in 2024?
Okay.
And if we do this without grounding, it says it hasn't been awarded yet because it's only trained up through August or so.
Okay.
So it doesn't know, and it says so, which is good, better than it hallucinating.
Yep, that's true.
But when we run it through with grounding turned on, we get a very different answer. So we get an answer that says the 2024 Nobel Prize was awarded to John Hopfield and Geoffrey Hinton for their work with artificial neural networks. And it has some numeric references and gives some more info, again, with some internal references. And then it has a list of those references.
Okay, yeah.
So it gives us kind of a heads up on what site it will go for, and then a link that is routed through Google, that's redirected through Google, so it tracks how much the results are used, that gets us to the actual result page itself. So if we were actually doing this as part of a chat session, I'd be giving these as links somehow. This was just a very simple formatter that I had set up, but we can build our own formatters.
Right.
That format this output in whatever way we wanted. And if we didn't send it through an output, and maybe I should have shown that as well, if we didn't send it through an output, it would still give us all of this text, just without the stuff in square brackets as annotations.
Right. Seems like it's got some markdown syntax, so I could see with just a little bit more work, you could make those into links and that reference the same page and all that stuff. So
funny you should say that, because one of the other formatters that I wrote and provided is a markdown formatter.
All right.
So it will format it in the exact same method that AI Studio normally does when it shows an example of this as well. So it looks a lot like what AI Studio looks like.
Okay.
This was just a simple one that, in this case proves to us that there's these links here. But The markdown one is there. If you were doing HTML, it's easy to write your own HTML one. If you want it in some other esoteric format, it's easy to do it in some other format.
Yeah.
We made the formatter really, really flexible so that you basically can format it however you want. It takes care of the trickier bits.
So when does the model determine that it needs to use this grounding? I know you've got a flag. So does it always check even if it has an answer? Does it always make a call out to Google search or not?
So if we look at here, as you said, it's whether we have the search tool set up. And with that search tool set up, under the 1.5 model, there's some configuration that's allowed, and there's a reasonable default for it. But under that, what this separate module does is determines whether it makes sense to call Google search, or if it calls Google search, if the results are useful and relevant to the question that you asked. And you can set that tolerance as part of that. Under 2.0, you don't have control over that. The model's been trained well enough to know when should you call Google search, when should you trust the results of Google search. So it varies a little bit depending on the model that you're using. But really for almost anything where you want to ground it in facts, even if the language model was trained on the material, you might want to go to, or it might determine that it should rely on the Google search results over whatever random word it's going to pick out next.
Okay. Well, that's pretty compact. That's what, 30 lines of code there.
Yeah.
And wow, that's definitely nice that you can see the model, setting up the search tool, setting up the formatter, and making the call.
And again, in LangChainJS, these are all really common paradigms.
Yeah.
The formatter, it's entirely normal to set up the string output parser. If you're using other chat systems, it's extremely common to have it format things in a particular way. There are other output parsers that make a lot of sense
Okay.
in other environments. This is just using a paradigm that we already know, we're already familiar with, and we're already using. If you're used to doing prompt templating as part of LangChain, that's just part of this chain as well, so we're very familiar with it. Everything here is just building on what already exists.
Right.
And taking advantage of this tool that Google is providing.
Very cool. No, I like how you tried to make equivalent functionality work for both 1.5 and 2. Make that transparent for the developer.
Well, it's been one of the things that frustrates me the most about systems in general and about what Google has been doing with Gemini. Is there's a lot of, well, it works this way here, but this way here, and you need this parameter here and this parameter on this platform. As developers, we don't like changing a lot of stuff, and we like the flexibility. So I thought it was important to make sure that that's maintained. As they moved to 2.0, they also introduced a whole new library, and that library isn't backwards compatible with their old library.
Yeah.
It's not entirely clear to me why it's not either, to be perfectly honest. So, as developers, if you want the new features, you need to move to a new library.
Yeah.
And I would like to personally encourage people to move to the new library that is built on top of at least a year worth of development, as opposed to a couple of months worth of development.
Yeah.
And has at least something of a commitment to keeping things more or less consistent moving forward. But, I'm a little biased, I'll admit that.
Well, nicely done. I'm glad that you took the time to do it, and this example makes it pretty clear on how one would go about using it.
Yeah, so I'll be publishing a blog post about this as well in the near future. And I hope, if you're not using LangChain or LangChainJS now, I hope you at least consider it. They're really powerful tools that really are fairly easy to work with and give you features like this. Things like Gemini's own set of libraries, they're really good, but to build on top of them, you need to do that building. And I'd like to think that we can all work together and contribute to open source tools like LangChain so that everyone doesn't have to reinvent the wheel a dozen times.
So I have a question because this seems like, at least when we first started talking about AI, we specifically talked about RAG, and there's lots of different variations of RAG, but seems specifically that type of approach, but making an API called a Google search.
Yes.
So that's interesting because it's just kind of playing into that same thing where we need to give the LLM a little bit of additional help with newer stuff or stuff in a domain that maybe it's not as much of an expert on. Can you constrain where it goes on the Google search? Can you point off a couple of websites of where it hits to get your information?
So two things about that. One is no, you can't. At least not under this configuration. Right now, there is no configuration at all allowed for the Google search tool. However, one of the things that Google has done before, and I haven't looked into it enough yet, is that in VertexAI, they have these things called data sources. And these are part of their agent builder tool.
Okay.
And part of what used to be Dialogflow. One of the tools that's available in Gemini is something that will ground it against your data sources. And you specify what data sources you want to ground it against. And I believe it will return things in the exact same structure as this. So, or if not the same structure, a similar structure, so that you are now grounding against your sources with references against your sources.
Yeah.
So you can choose to annotate the results and say, and here's where we get that from.
Okay.
And if you're building your system right, link to those sources separately.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, you hit it right on the head. This is a retrieval augmented generation system. The default one, the one that everyone is going to be looking at, is the Google augmentation. What's going to be cool is augmenting against your data, and maybe also Google's data. You can have both tools running. No reason why not.
Yeah.
And having it say, here's which ones came from your tool. And your data source, and making it that easy for you to just say, use these data sources.
Yeah.
When it becomes that off the shelf, that will be amazing.
Yeah.
And Google is well positioned to do that. They're better positioned than almost anyone else out there to do exactly that.
Yeah. No, I agree. So that's good. Thanks for answering my question on that.
The other question that you didn't ask is, this is cool, what is it going to cost? Because, this is essentially letting you build a tool that directly competes against Google using Google's data.
Yeah.
So Google, right now, if you use grounding with Google Search and VertexAI, they're charging $35 per 1,000 requests. So that comes out to 3.5 cents per request.
Wow, that's
Did I
kind
do
of
that
steep.
math right? Yeah, it's pretty steep. And a lot of people have criticized them about how steep it is. Under 2.0, it is currently free because it's in preview. And we'll see what pricing actually comes out at the other end. It's interesting because Google obviously doesn't want to price themselves out of business.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting to, because if you look at it on the web, then you've got ads, but if you use it through an agent or some sort of an assistant or chatbot, whatever you're using it with, then yeah, they're looking for a monetization stream off of that because they're losing out on money through their advertising. So
Right, and it raises the question with like every place out there that's providing data through an API
yeah,
that you may want to get through an AI. How do you price it? How do you charge for it? What is this actually worth? I think 3.5 cents per query is steep. On the other hand, maybe that's close to the actual price. Maybe I don't know.
yeah,
But I think it's a great question, both for Google and for the industry in general.
yep.
So this was my holiday project. I had I had fun doing it, and I'm glad it's out there and available to folks now. There's more coming. This is going to be. I've got a bunch more stuff with LangChainJS coming over the short term and likely over the long term as well.
Well, thank you for continuing to support open source generally and specifically this project, and for being the expert that is bringing in Google stuff. I know you've been on the forefront of bringing a lot of the newer Google stuff in from your advantage of being able to see things sometimes earlier, or just understanding with all of your past experience with how things work. And then, I don't know, just thanks for taking the time, because you're getting this out quicker than somebody would have to then try to figure this out themselves. So thanks for that.
Yeah, I try. Hopefully, everyone benefits.
Yeah, I'm sure they are. So thank you very much, Alan, for taking the time to share that with us today, and for looking forward to what else we're going to be able to see, how it progresses during the year. So if you are using LangChain, or if you're interested in using these things, this library and these models, then we'd love to see what you're doing with it and talking about it more. And we will talk more about this subject and many others in 2025 on Two Voice Devs.
Two voice devs. Take care, Mark.
Yep, you too. Thanks, Alan.